laws of rescuing and freeing Jewish hostages from the enemy as part of our larger class of Jewish ethics and values in going to war against our enemies. Here we go. I begin here. We begin with a refresher from 1 Samuel. Last week, we did a relook at the story of Lot, Abraham's nephew, who was taken hostage by the 4 kings, Kedar, Omer and company, from the 5 kings, Sodom, Amorah and company. And Abraham risked his life to save Lot, free him. And we also looked in the Torah, Sefer Bamidbar, the case where a Jewish handmaiden was taken captive by Canaanites, some say Amalekites, and the Jewish nation went to war to free that one person. And I made reference to this chapter that our Tuesday night class learned a while back, and I made reference to it, but I wanted our Thursday night class to look at it. And for those that also have been in Tuesday class, it's a refresher. We'll do it quickly in English to get the idea. King Saul was alive trying to kill David. David had been secretly anointed to be the new king eventually by the prophet Shmuel, Samuel. And David had once been the most beloved of King Saul's citizens. He used to play harp for King Saul, and Saul gave him as a wife, Michal, Shaul's daughter. But over time, Shaul became mentally ill or emotionally ill. Something went wrong that was brought on him, not just biologically or DNA, but by God Almighty. And God set him such that he started pursuing David to kill him. And David had to get out of the land of Israel, or it was part of the land of Israel, but out of Jewish sovereignty to the Canaanites in order to save his life, to get beyond Saul's reach. And I refresh your memory with chapter 30 of Shmuel Aleph, and then we'll go from there. So David had made a what shall we say? Had made a covenant with Achish, the king of the Canaanites, in whose boundaries he was. And we talked about that last week. And he ended up in the city of Ziklag in southern Philistia, southern Philistine territory, outside the ambit of King Achish. And he was sort of running his own show. And the king really did not know anything going on, understood in his mind that David was simply a loyal traitor, that's an oxymoron, that he had been loyal to Israel, but now a traitor to Israel and had become loyal to the enemy Canaan in order to save his life from Saul, who was trying to kill him and had made him into public enemy number 1. So David was in southern Philistia, and with his men, 600 men and their wives and kids, he would raid neighboring armies for the purpose of taking wealth from them to support his men. By the time David and his men arrived in Ziklag on the 3rd day, the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and against Ziklag. What he did was, while going on different raids and sorties, he began leaving Ziklag undefended because no one was going to mess with him. And he went on another sortie, and on the 3rd day, with Ziklag undefended, all those wives and kids and property, Amalekites, who this time were not being attacked by David, he was attacking someone else, they made a raid into Ziklag, and they burned down the city. They burned down the city. What do you mean burn down a city? It's like General Sherman burned down Atlanta, or the Great Chicago Fire or San Francisco Fire. He burned down a city. They took the women in captive. That's that word again, shvuyim, shevi. Shevi is a noun. That means captivity. Shivuyim are hostages, people taken into captivity. Vayishbu, and they took a hostage. Vayishbu singular, Vayishbu is they took many hostages. They took into captivity as hostages the women. Asher ba mikaton v'ad gadol, whether from the lower classes up to the most highly regarded class, highest economic, or how broad the difference of economics, high and low economics in that setting was there, but the most important women, the women of the least important, lo hemitu ish, they did not kill any of them. Bain hagu v'elchu darkam, and they took all these women, and they took them out, they took them captive to Amalekite land. Well, when David and his men came to town, having come back from their latest attack, expecting as always to see their wives and kids, and they found their whole city was burned. Found it burned down, their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Nishbu was the passive verb, were taken captive, were hostage. And David and the troops broke into tears, more than broke into tears. Va'isu et kolam, they wailed and cried until they had no strength left for further crying and weeping. David's two wives have been taken, Achinoam and Abigail. He was in great danger also. His troops almost wanted to kill him. You got us into this mess. You're the general, we follow you and your strategies, and you could have left Siklag guarded better and taken fewer men. You had the strategy, we followed you. As we've been learning in Tuesday night class, just last Tuesday, they would follow him and his orders. And when he told his men, as we learned Tuesday night, you are within striking distance of the latest Philistine attack, but God has commanded me not to strike back immediately, but to go around and be behind them, take them by surprise and ambush. But now that we're in the ambush position and it looks like we can do great, we're not going to start, he said, we learned Tuesday night, because God said, don't start until you hear the rustling of the leaves of the trees. And we learned in the commentaries there were soldiers saying, what are we waiting for? We got to start. And he said, we're not starting until we hear rustling of the leaves. And yeah, we might get killed if we don't hear it. But that's the command from God, and we follow God's ways. And if we're going to be dead, let's die as righteous tzaddikim rather than dying as evil people who broke God's command. So they always followed David, whatever he did. And in light of what happened here, they were ready to kill him. He was in danger, for the troops threatened to stone him. For all the troops were bitter on account of their sons and daughters. But David sought strength in the Lord of God. Right, Chazek David. Chizuk, he said, God is going to be there. And he asked of the Urim and Tumim. We learned that Tuesday night also. Whenever he went to war, whenever he defended, he always inquired of God through the Urim and Tumim worn by the high Kohen. And so he asked the high Kohen, Evyatar, the son of Achimelech, who had been one of the Kohanim, who had been murdered by King Saul's underling Doeg the Edomi in the city of Nov. He said, bring the ephod, your chest plate. And he asked, please ask God, what should we do? Through the Urim and Tumim. Erdof acharei hagedud hazeh ha'asigenu. He asked two questions. We also learned Tuesday night, you're supposed to ask one question at a time. And if you ask two, God answers only the first one. And in an emergency, God will answer both. Erdof acharei hagedud hazeh. So he asked the Urim and Tumim, should I pursue militarily the battalion who's done this to Siklag and our families? Ha'asigenu, and if I do, will I catch up with them? Vayomer, and the Urim and Tumim response from God, Redof, indeed pursue them. Ki haseg tatsig v'hatzel tatsil, because you will catch up with them and you will save everybody. Okay, Vayelech David u'shesh me'atish sherito. So David and the 600 men went, and they got to the place. And I'm going to skip some of the story that's kind of very interesting. We did learn it at the time, But for right now, we're going to skip it because of time and where the focus of tonight's class really goes. And so David finds out direction from a particular escaped servant, a particular servant Egyptian who has escaped his Amalekite master. And David asks him, which way did they go? And the escaped servant tells him. And anyway, David makes it to there. And as David was led successfully to the location where the Philistines, Amalekites were encamped, he saw they're just oblivious to the world around them because they're partying. They've had a successful sortie of their own, taking all this Jewish property and women and children, and they're eating and they're drinking and they're celebrating. These Amalekites celebrating all that they've been able to pull out of their spoils from battles they had against Philistines. These are Amalekites, and as well as in the land of Judea. And David went to war against them, and it was a grand slaughter. From that night to the next day, next night, not a single one of those Amalekites survived, except for 400 of their men, who fled by riding camels. And our Tuesday night class learned about that they were repaid as a reward to 400 Edomite Amalekites who followed Esav centuries upon centuries earlier, when the son of Yaakov, when the son of Yitzchak, the twin, encountered his twin brother Yaakov, perhaps anticipating killing him. And in the end, he did not kill Yaakov, and 400 of his men departed with him rather than kill Yaakov and the Jews. And for that, God rewarded them, that 400 Amalekites. Amalek was a descendant of Esav. Amalek is not just the name of a nation, it's a nation that was named for the guy who started that nation, Amalek, who descended from Esav. And so anyway, 400 Amalekites survived and fled by camel, and everybody else got wiped out. And David saved and rescued everybody that the Amalekites took. He took back his wives, Achinoam and Abigail, and he took back everybody's wives. They took back everything, young and old, male and female, all the bounty. Everything David rescued. And so on and so forth and so forth and so on. I read that for you today to remind you, first of all, this indeed is part of a Jewish biblical attitude towards rescuing hostages. We don't really negotiate. Abraham did not negotiate with the 4 kings who took Lot. And Moshe Rabbeinu did not negotiate with the Canaanite Amalekites who took the handmaiden. Nobody negotiated. They went to war to kill. Whatever, they didn't just kill randomly. If they could get the hostages out without killing them, great. If they would have to kill some, okay. But no mercy until all the hostages are free. That's a very important point. And it's got great importance to us now. The idea, this is Jewish law. This is not a political science class. If it were a contemporary political science class, we would be chanting from the river to the sea, Arafat must come back and see. No, this is Torah law. Torah law is no compromise to free Jewish hostages. And whatever it takes, or as the anti-Semites say, at all cost, whatever the cost, at all costs. And if there are video shown on television and on YouTube of Arabs wailing and complaining about what's happening to the Gaza, that they turned from a paradise into a dirt hole, we have no sympathy. We don't pay lip service that we don't mean. You have all these, if you're a politician, You say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for all sides, right? What do they do? I'm against anti-Semitism with all my heart and soul, and also Islamophobia. There is no Islamophobia, but like every Democrat politician and a bunch of Republicans too. I'm totally against anti-Semitism. I think October 7th was horrible, and I'm equally opposed to Islamophobia. What's going on in my college as a university president, I'm very concerned about what they're saying to the Jews, and I'm concerned about Islamophobia. You imagine Jews on a college campus making it hard for Muslims to go to class, blocking them, holding big signs that are anti-Muslim, attacking Muslim pita stores and falafel hangouts the way that people attack Jewish delicatessens and bagel stores. Can you imagine Jews marching through Arab neighborhoods in on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, threatening people? Can you imagine Jews attacking a mosque in Brooklyn or in any city in America? It's in Dearborn, can you imagine? So the halacha is we have no mercy and no sympathy until we get our hostages back. We don't want to hurt any of them, even if they're anti-Semites. If you're going to start trying to kill all the anti-Semites in the world, you're never going to get done. You're never going to get done. Where do you start? Well, if you want to just narrow it down to the countries that vote against Israel in the United Nations, you'll never get done. You never get done. So the only way to deal with it is to free the hostages, and the general approach in Judaism is, we actually don't care what you think about us. Just keep your hands off us. If you hate Jews, it's actually okay by us. If you think that we're bad this way and we're bad that way, and we're capitalists and you're a Marxist, or we're Marxists and you're a capitalist, or we're liberals and you're conservative, or we're conservatives and you're liberals, or we're the worst landlords and you're a tenant, or we're the worst tenants and you're a it doesn't matter. You can think all you like. Just keep your hands off us. But if you put your hands on us, the halacha is, bala hargacha hashkem lahargo. First of all, someone who rises up against you to kill you, you kill him first, and you ask questions later. I was watching a TV show with Denise the other night, and you've all seen a million of these in the movies and TV. One of these things where the good guy has a gun pointed at the bad guy, and the bad guy's holding a knife, and the good guy says, "Now you drop your knife right now, or I'm going to have to shoot." This goes on for like 30 seconds, 9 warnings. And of course, what ends up happening is the bad guy stabs him to death with the knife because the good guy won't pull the trigger. In Judaism, you pull the trigger, and then you talk about it later. And as the guy's dead, if you feel you need to, you could say, it's a shame I had to kill you, but you didn't drop the knife. In Judaism, you don't negotiate with people who want to kill you, and you don't negotiate with hostage holders unless, as we learned last week and will continue to learn, it is the most practical way to save the Jew with the least amount of damage, with the least amount of Jewish damage. And we learned last week, and we'll continue learning today, if you do have to pay and you could save the hostages without killing the other guys, that's okay, but you can't pay too much. Because if you pay too much, then Jews become a desirable commercial commodity. And you're basically encouraging the other people to start, did you hear how much you can get for a Jewish hostage? Why am I busting my chops 9 to 5 every day at work? I just need a Jewish hostage. And so the word has to get out that we don't pay, quote unquote, too much. And that was, as I taught last week and continued teaching, about Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, who said when he was taken hostage by the government, intending to help their budgetary needs by taking hostage the most important rabbi of the time and telling the community, you can have him back if you pay this amount of money. And the rabbi said, don't pay. Because if you pay, they'll be taking rabbis left and right, all over the world, by the way, not just in Rothenburg. And in fact, he died in prison by his own command, rather than be hostage released, than be ransomed out. So we begin with David HaMelech, and they went to war, and they killed everybody. Had they been able to get the hostages without killing, certainly if they were not Amalekites, they would have been able to do it. Once you're dealing with Amalekites trying to kill you, it's a whole other thing. So we continue in our study of this very, very important subject. We go to the Shulchan Arukh. Shulchan Arukh literally means the set table. Judaism, there's a kind of, it's not funny puns, but there's halakhic texts, all are plays on words. I mentioned this also Tuesday night. Every famous, or most every famous rabbinic commentator from the Middle Ages would take a pseudonym and would call his commentary not by his own name, which he could. Rashi's commentaries by his name, Rashi, Rab Shlomo Yitzchaki. It's the acronym of Rav Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rabbi Solomon, the son of Isaac. But many would take on pseudonyms that sometimes would be puns, and particularly if there were a commentary on the commentary. So the commentary on the commentary almost always would take on a pun. Not a joking pun, but so Rambam mostly went by the name Rambam. Rav Moshe ben Maimon, Rabbi Moses, the son of Maimon, in Greek, Maimonides. But he also is the Mishnah Torah. Now, the rabbi, just a more modern one, Rabbi Yisrael Kagan, wrote a book about the evil of speaking gossip and slander. And he called the book Chafetz Chaim, based on a verse in the Psalms. Who is the man who desires life? Miha isha chafetz chaim ohev yamim lirotov, who wants to see good days of his life. Nitzor lashon chamera, hold back your tongue from speaking evil. Nitzor lashon chamera, usafatecha midaber merma, and hold back your lips from speaking slander. So he started becoming known as instead of as Rabbi Kagan, author of the Chafetz, he became known as the Chafetz Chaim. And then when he wrote a commentary on Jewish law, he became known, it was like, he called it, it was the Mishnah Brura, and people would say, who wrote the Mishnah Brura? The Chafetz Chaim. So anyway, the Shulchan Arukh was composed by Rabbi Yosef Karo around the 1500s, 400 years after Rambam composed the Mishnah Torah. And Rav Karo basically was updating the Mishnah Torah, not changing the laws, not like amending them, updating, because 400 years had passed and new issues had come up. And he was just putting the book from 400 or 500 years ago into language that was the more modern contemporary language, the latest thing in 1500s Poland and 1500s Judaism. He actually was not based in Poland. Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis, wrote a sub-commentary on the Shulchan Arukh, the Code of Jewish Law, that sort of didn't modify the Code of Jewish Law, but pointed out places where Ashkenazim do it differently from Sephardim. So the Shulchan Arukh, the Code of Jewish Law, it doesn't really translate as Code of Jewish Law. It translates as Shulchan Arukh is the set table. What is a table? You got a table, you put a tablecloth, you have a plate, you have forks, knives, spoons, you have a nice napkin, you have a cup for water, another cup for wine, you have the bottle of wine, you have the bottle of water. And so the Shulchan Arukh is like it's an all-prepared table. You don't have to go to the Gemara, you don't have to go to the Mishnah, you don't have to go here, it's all prepared for you on one table. And that's why I called it the prepared table of Shulchan Arukh. And since it was from a Sephardic perspective, and 95% of Judaism is the same for Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Sephardim and Ashkenazim, we both do our Shabbos on Saturday. We both blow a shofar in Rosh Hashanah. We're both kosher. It's 95% the same. It's just a little bit of stuff like whether you eat rice on Passover. So Rav Moshe Isserlis, he wrote his notes, like his footnotes, to the Code of Jewish Law to tell you where Ashkenazic is different. And how did he name it? What did he name it? Since he was putting something onto the set table. He called his commentary the tablecloth. It wasn't making a joke. He called it the mapa, the tablecloth. So we talk about how, well, it says in the set table this, but the tablecloth says that. That's what you're actually saying when you say, here's what it says in Shulchan Arukh, but let's say what the mapa says. So, but in English, everyday terminology, we refer to the Code of Jewish Law. So it literally means the set table. So we learned last week the Mishnah Torah Rambam around 1100, the laws of Pidyon Shvuyim. And you will see that the set table, the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Arukh, is extremely almost identical in wording, because he wasn't changing Judaism. He was just modifying or updating where it called for an updating, but not like an updating like Reform Judaism, where they say, well, that's Judaism, but it's 300 years later, so let's update it and basically change Judaism. So now you could eat pork and you don't have to observe Shabbat. And the latest thing is that rabbis at the Reform can be married to non-Jews because they can't get new Reform rabbis anymore. So the latest thing a week ago that, all right, if you're married to non-Jew, you could still be Reform rabbi. And of course, if the rabbi is the most holy religious person in the congregation, what's the standard for the members of the congregation? You ask yourself that. I'll be writing on that soon, but I just didn't have time yet. So here's the siman, namely the chapter. The way we speak about the Shulchan Arukh, and a chapter, instead of being called a parak, is called a siman, and the sections, instead of being called, let's say, chelek, are called seif. Siman, seif. Okay. Din Pidyon Shvuyim. This is siman Reish Nun Hey, Reish Nun Bet, 252. The laws of redeeming the captives. V'chetzad podinotam, and how we redeem them. Ubo Yud Bet Seifim, and there are 12 sections to this chapter, to this title. Pidyon Shvuyim Kodim L'Farnasat Aniyim. As we learned in different terminology last week in the Mishnah Torah, it's the same idea. Redeeming hostages is more important in terms of how to use public funds, more important than financing the charity of the poor people. Ulachasotan, and to dress, to provide clothing for poor people who have no clothes. More important than that is freeing our hostages. Ve'ein mitzvah gedolah kepidyon shvuyim, and there is no mitzvah greater than freeing Jewish hostages. Hilkhot, therefore, l'chol davar mitzvah shegavu ma'ot b'shvilo, that no matter, that for anything for which a Jewish community, and in those days of the Shulchan Arukh, Jews were living in ghettos, and so Jews really had Jewish communities where they ran their own community, they had autonomy. You would have a big anti-Semitic country that would have all the Jews in the ghetto, and unlike the ghetto you think of with Nazi Germany, which was a prelude to mass murder, the ghettos of Europe were just keep all the Jews in the ghetto, and they could do whatever they want there. They can have their own courts, they could have their own police, they could even execute their own justice. If some guy kills or murders or does whatever he does in the ghetto to another Jew, and their court says execute the guy, they can go ahead and do it. What do we care? So among other things, every Jewish community, and again, when we talk about a community, we're not talking about Borough Park or Mea She'arim or I don't know, Pico Robertson in Los Angeles or the Jewish community of West Rogers Park, Chicago, or Golders Green or whatever in England. Or when we talk about a Jewish community, it's basically a ghetto, but a real big ghetto. It's like, it could be hundreds, could be thousands. It's like Anatevka times much. And they would annually, part of the Jewish community was you had a committee in charge of raising charity. And I'm not talking about like nowadays where you get emails. I know somebody refers to them as schnorrograms. And you get emails asking to donate to this charity and that charity. In those years, in that setting, the council would sit down with sort of a ledger of the entire population of the ghetto and pretty much how much money each guy makes. They made it their business to know pretty much how much everyone was good for. and the council would decide this year, this is how much money we're going to expect from this guy. We expect 3,000 kopecks from him, and 2,000 kopecks from him, and 8 kopecks from him. And that's how they came up with it. By the way, if you haven't figured it out by now, you now know how. If you wonder what kind of name is it for a Jew to be named Sandy Koufax, what do you think Koufax comes from? It comes from kopecks. Jews had to collect kopecks for charity. Like, it's one thing when a guy's called Goldstein or Horowitz, but yeah, that's where these things come from. You learn class, you start learning history. What kind of Jewish name is Koufax? It means somebody in his family gave charity 500 years earlier. So anyway, we continue. He doesn't even know it. He should come to class. So you had the charity was committed, was aggregated in the community. And what Rambam now is adding is that when they did raise that charity, and it was their obligation to use some of it to build a shul and some of it to give to the poor and the orphans, and buy clothing for those who had no clothes and food for those who had no food. And the Shulchan Arukh is saying, no matter what purpose that charitable money was raised for, if a Jew is taken hostage and money is needed to free the hostage, by halakha, you're allowed to take the money out of any of the different funds for which charity was raised and use it for that. That's not embezzling. It's not, well, the money was raised for children's shoes and now we're using it to free some guy. You have to do that. L'chol davar mitzvah shegavu ma'ot, but no matter what the mitzvah for which they raised charitable money, yecholim l'shanotam l'fidyon shvuyim. You're allowed to change the purpose to redeem the hostages via filu. Im gavel etzorich binyan bet knesset, even if the money was raised to build a shul, va'afilu im kanu ha'etzim va'avanim v'hakotzim l'tzorich habinyan, and even if they already purchased all the supplies for the construction of the shul, the wood and the stones, she'asur l'machram b'shvil mitzvah acheret. And there are separate laws, I'm not going to look up for you now, but there are separate laws that if they're going to build a shul and they bought wood as part of the construction, and they bought stones as part of the construction, they're not allowed later to sell that wood and stones for other mitzvahs. Once it's purchased for a shul, it goes to the shul. But mutar lemachram l'tzorach pidyon shvuyim. One and only one exception. You're allowed to sell the wood, the supplies, the stones, so that you have money to redeem the hostage. Avalim bena'uhu kavar, but if they already built the shul, lo yim karoto. At that point, you don't sell a shul that's been built in order to free hostages. Okay, let's continue. We learned this last week, so I won't go through it in the same detail this week. One who turns his eyes away from the need to redeem the hostages violates every number of 5, 6, and more Torah commandments. For every moment that a Jew delays rescuing a hostage, who could be rescued sooner if you didn't delay, we didn't learn that last week. It's like spilling blood. If you know you can do it, and it's very interesting, because in Israel right now, that's part of the debate, of some people saying, if we would only give Sinwar of the Hamas what he wants, namely a complete withdrawal from Gaza, a declaration that the war is over, number 3, a declaration that Hamas can come back and govern Gaza, number 4, that Israel needs to release thousands of Hamas terrorists that they've got in custody, terrorists who've murdered and otherwise. So if you do all of that, we'll release whatever hostages we still have that are alive. So, but doesn't it say every moment the one delays unnecessarily? So that's the point. This is necessary. You can't, because we also see you can't just pay any price. You're not allowed to redeem the shvuyim the hostages for more than a reasonable hostage price, ransom. And of course, no ransom is reasonable, but as I said last week, you know what we mean. Mipnei tikkun olam, and we learned last week also in the Mishnah Torah that the term tikkun olam is nothing like what the leftists, the George Soros liberal Jews talk about. I do this for tikkun olam, I do that for tikkun olam. They don't know what tikkun olam is. They take a term out of Judaism and they arrogate it for a completely false purpose. Tikkun olam means to repair the world or to fix the world. And if you start overpaying for hostages, you are destroying the world. And in order to fix the world and keep it one piece, you can't overpay for hostages, because otherwise, shelo yihiyu ha'oyevim mosrim atzmam alehem lishvutam. Because otherwise, you're going to have the enemies of Israel risking their very lives to grab more and more Jewish hostages, because they're so valuable. Aval adam yachol lifdot about smo. That's as far as the Jewish people. But an individual, we didn't learn this last week because it wasn't in the Rambam, where we learned, Shulchan Arukh says an individual could pay any price, right? The community, there's a limit on what a community is allowed to pay. But an individual, if he wants to pay too much, that's his business. B'chol ma sheyirtzeh, v'chen lamed tavchet l'talmid chacham, o afilu eno talmid chacham, ela shehut talmid charif. Likewise, for a Torah scholar, or even someone who's not such a scholar, but has devoted his life to learning Torah, and maybe even a great singular community leader, like if Chuck Schumer were actually a decent Jew, rather than someone who uses his position to demand that the Israeli government, that the Israeli people overthrow their government and have a coup, or go and grill hamburgers with cheese on it. Someone of great Jewish consequence, like, I don't know, Joe Lieberman, when he was a vice presidential candidate, there's his own story there, but let's leave him as the example. Maybe even if he's not a Torah scholar, but he's a symbol of righteous Jewishness. Maybe for him you pay extra. Likewise, you're not supposed to rescue physically. We learned this last week. The captives because of tikkun olam, because otherwise shelo yehiyu oivim machbidin olam aleim umarbim b'shmiratam. Because if the word gets out among the enemies that the Jews will go to any physical degree to rescue their people, then the captors, the people who take the hostages, will subject the hostages to greater persecution and may very well kill them. So if you would say, well, what about what Israel just did a few weeks ago, rescuing 4? So the reason is, like, first of all, of course, Israel is not being conducted right now by Jewish law per se. It's not a halakhic society with a Beit HaMikdash and with a Torah-fearing Jew at the top in a cabinet, although it's the first time in the history of Israel since 1948. It's the first time in 3/4 of a century of Israel that the majority of the government are Orthodox Jews. Of the 64 Knesset members who make up the coalition of Likud and Shas and Agudat Yisrael and Otzma and Religious Zionism, out of those 64, there's 33 Orthodox Jews. Not only Otzma and Religious Zionism, but there are a few Orthodox guys in Likud as well. And it's the first time in the history of Israel that the majority of their government, not the majority of the Knesset, but the majority of the ruling government are Orthodox, which is one of the reasons that you have demonstrations every week in Tel Aviv to take down the government. They can't handle that. It's really true. They can't handle it. Now, if imagine Israel were an Orthodox Beit HaMikdash Torah society, even then, it would have been appropriate to go and save the hostages physically. Why? Through the last series of Arab hostage takings, Israel has not gone in physically, following this cultural value that you don't go in to free hostages because they'll be rougher on the hostages, might kill them, so you pay a price. Thing is, Israel is paid frequently, almost always, too high a price. What makes this different? Number one, they now have learned from a wide series of experiences where they give up too many hostages and they give up too much. They've learned that they violated Tikkun Olam, that they indeed have done what Shulchan Arukh and Mishnah Torah said they weren't allowed to do if they had been an Orthodox society, that they have so overpaid for so much, for so many times. Remember, Yahya Sinwar, the head of the Hamas, who I mentioned earlier tonight, he had been in an Israeli prison, and they freed him as part of buying the freedom of one or two prisoners. To free two prisoners, they released like 1,000 people who went on to make up the Hamas of Gaza. So part of it is the Tikkun Olam issue. You now have 1,200 people killed on October 7, and all the additional people. They are part of what happened when Israel gave up those hostages, when the prisoners they were holding. So that's part of it. That's one reason it's justified to go at this point and not pay. And secondly, if the whole reason that they say ein mavrichin, we don't go physically to release them and break them loose, break them out, in order to prevent the hostage holders from holding the others tighter and maybe killing some, what Israel now has seen is that among the remaining 120 hostages, probably 2/3 already have been murdered. That if you don't go in to physically get them out, they're being killed anyway. And this way, at least they saved 4. And then they saved the 2 guys from Argentina. At least they saved them because they're all being killed now. So that's how it differs. And that's actually an example of how the halakha applies and how it's meant to be. We continue. A little bit more in the Shulchan Arukh. Well, this we learned last week. I won't do that again. One more. In Torah times, a Jew could be a slave. And this part of it I didn't exactly go through last time because it was Mishnah Torah, and a Jew could be a slave. A slave is not like a black slave during the Confederacy or pre-Confederacy in the Deep South. It was more like a servant, a butler, or a maid. A little bit less freedom than a modern day butler or maid, but nothing like a slave. They had to eat first. They had to be taken care of. It was like a whole. They couldn't be physically punished, and you couldn't separate. It's not this at all, but it's the only Hebrew word we have for both. So sometimes, now the thing is, an Eved a slave, Jewish slave, had to observe Torah law. And there's like a whole discussion where he did not have to he did not have to, he had the laws of a woman that he did not have to observe positive commandments, mitzvot aseh, that are time related, shehazman grama, sort of like women. Women have to observe all the negative commandments. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. And positive commandments, they must observe all positive, except for those that are time related. And I don't want to get into too much of it. I have done that in the past, related to having babies and taking care of them. They take priority. And even if the woman doesn't have a baby, we went through how the law doesn't distinguish. They have a baby, they don't have a baby. The law doesn't want women to resist or desist from having babies because they want to rather do the mitzvahs. And we've gone through all this in the past. But a slave likewise has to keep Torah law, except for positive mitzvot that are time related. So a slave who sells himself into slavery to a Jewish household, you don't redeem him. For that reason, you can and should try to come up with the money, not under a theory that it's the same burden. It's good to get him free, but not if he's going to end up having to sell himself back into slavery. They would sell themselves into slavery, sort of renting out their bodies. not having a third party putting them up for sale, but they would rent themselves out because they couldn't otherwise figure out how to support themselves. But what about if they rented themselves out, sold themselves to a non-Jew? Okay, so first of all, somebody who sold himself to a non-Jew, or either he ended up under the custody of a non-Jew because he couldn't find a Jew ready to buy him. So he sold himself to a non-Jew because he needed the money and the security, the financial security. Or he borrowed money from a non-Jew and then was unable to repay the debt. So they took him, which was the law of the land, that it's not really like a Hamas hostage, but if the guy doesn't pay his debt, you take him and you make him work for you until he pays off the debt by doing labor. We learned last week, the first and second time you do redeem him, the community puts up money to get him out. And the third time you don't get him out because he just keeps doing it. But if the non-Jews put out the word, we're going to kill him, then you can do whatever you have to do to get him out. And then we also learned that when he dies, you can, even if it's the third time or beyond, you can redeem out his kids. Okay. But on the other hand, if while in non-Jewish custody, he converts to the non-Jewish religion, then you don't get him out. Evich Nishba, a Jewish servant who ended up in custody of non-Jews, Ho'il v'tova l'shem avdut, v'kibel alav mitzvot peduyim podim otok Yisrael shenishba. If he keeps Torah law, you get him out. And if he doesn't keep Torah law, but ends up going to them, to their religion, you don't get him out. And then it talks a little bit more about priorities. If there's only enough money to get one person out, huva aviv rabo b'shevi, if a man is being held hostage with his father and his rabbi, hu kodem l'rabo, he comes out first before his rabbi, v'rabo kodem la'aviv, and his rabbi is second in priority to get out before his father. Imo kodemet l'chulam, and if his mother is being held hostage, she comes first, and so on and so forth. I could go through this entire Siman chapter and then beyond it, but this gives you a good flavor of it. Before we go on to the Gemara, which is next, the Mishnah and Gemara, I'm going to do as I did last week, and I want to underscore the Jewish commitment, how much it's in our bones, in a way that no other people are committed to release their hostages. And last week, for example, I think Janet, well, of course Janet, but I think it was Janet, I think she asked, what about when Americans were taken hostage by the Iranian government in their embassy? And just to refresh your memory, that's a perfect example. Do you remember demonstrations on the college campuses to free our hostages in Iran? Or demonstrations in any city in the United States, we demand free our American hostages? No. Nobody would let it. Do you remember who did anything? Nobody did anything. And finally, Carter tried one thing that turned out tragic. We sent a helicopter in the middle of the night to do like what the Jews did to it in Entebbe. Only God blessed Entebbe. By contrast, God did not bless that effort. And as the American helicopters were going in the middle of the night through the Iranian desert to their destination, a horrible sandstorm broke out, almost the hand of God, made it blinding. And if you recall, the helicopters crashed into each other and Americans died, and it was just a disaster. The only way we got them out was by voting the right way that November. Ronald Reagan got elected, if you remember. The day of Reagan's inauguration, that day, Iran announced that, Beth Fox mentions many Americans did wear yellow ribbons. This is true. And many, many more did not. But Beth is right. There was some of that. But if you remember, the day of Reagan's inauguration, Ayatollah Khomeini announced, what a coincidence. today's the day we plan to let out all the American hostages. Reagan had said if he gets in, he's going to bomb Qom, the holy city of Qom. But to underscore the Jewish passion that is so unique, I just want to play for you another song. Many of you may not know these songs. They're from 40 years ago. And I'm presenting them because it's part of the education here, to leave something with you that you carry beyond the class. Not I, there were people who wrote songs to free Soviet Jewry. Can you think of songs to free the Iranian hostages? There's a guy, Alan Jackson, a great country music writer. He wrote a song after 9/11. Another great country music, Darryl Worley, and also the late Toby Keith. There are those who wrote songs commemorating what the tragedy, the Pearl Harbor quality tragedy of 9/11. That would be like October 7. But a song that to free our hostages on Iran, or even this poor guy, Evan Gershkovich, who Putin took as a hostage, he's going to get convicted and sentenced to 1 million years in prison, not in order to keep him in prison, but that's how Putin gets. America arrests Soviet illegal arms dealers, and international criminals. And then Putin takes an American hostage, Brittany Griner, the basketball player, or Evan Gershkovich, and they sentence them to like 1 billion years in hard labor with the expectation that America will turn over the illegal arms dealer in return for the hostage. And then 3 days later, after the exchange, Putin will arrest another Schmendrick who goes to Russia on a vacation or whatever and hold them the same way. But Jews, we actually wrote songs that became anthems, and we played these anthems. Let My People Go. This was a major Jewish song.
Faithfully, a prisoner of conscience serving in hell. You're hurting. Thousands shouting no, let my people go. Enough of your bluff and your hurting. Thousands shouting no, let my people go. Enough of your bluff and your hurt. Thousands shouting no, let my people go. Enough of your bluff and your hurt. Thousands shouting no, let my people go. Enough of your bluff and your hurt. Thousands shouting no, let my people go. Enough of your bluff and your hurt.
That's one of two. By the way, this one has 21,000 views. It's one of 5 versions of that up. This thing has more than 1 million views, all in all. It was a defining song of the period. And I'm going to close with one more so that you know it wasn't just one songwriter who did this. This was such a theme in the 1970s that for those of you that don't remember it, either because you're younger or because you had other priorities at the time, I want you to know this defined American Jews and Jews all over the world. At that time, it was the defining thing in being Jewish, fighting for Soviet Jewry. It's something that no other people in the world do. You don't see, I mean, I could give you examples, it's no point. Just nobody does that. With closing tonight and still time to catch a repeat of the debate, I want to close out with this, and I have enough material for one last class. I have the Mishnah from Gittin 4, and I have 2 incredible Gemara segments in Gittin 45a and Gittin 58a, and it's going to be a really great class. But for right now, let's close it out with one more example. How many hits? This has 53,000 views, and like the other one, it's got far more. It's got like 3 or 4 of them up there, probably 200,000, 300,000 views. Again, Jews wrote this. No one else in the world. If it's not Jew, no one's going to help people get out if not Jews. And others will help, but Jews have got to fight Jews' battles. And it's a unique part of our culture. We don't let any of our people remain held hostage, and we do whatever we can. And if we're not in a position ourselves to go ahead and pay Russia or go into Russia and free them, so we have demonstrations, petitions, write songs, whatever we can do to maximize consciousness. And if the demonstrations had to get violent, they got violent, and more than 1 million Jews got out of Russia.
They call me Anatole, in prison I do lie. My little window looks out on a Russian sky. I've been arrested here for crimes they have not named, but all my people know the charge will be a frame. See my accuser standing in the hall. He points his finger at us all. You now must pay the penalty for the crime of daring to be free. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. For 15 centuries we've called this land our home. We love the Russian soil as much as anyone. In countless armies our young boys have died for you. But never did you call them sons, you always called them Jew. We fell in battle for the Tsar. 100,000 died at Babiyar, and yet no monument will mark their grave. Just on our passports, the word Yevrei. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone.
Tractate, Goldfeld, Torabilski, Korenblish, Milburn, Kalinsky, Kaczerski, Shishrievsky, Cyril Grossman, Mendel-Lewis, Ruben, Rabinovich, Ginsburg, Yakov, Alexander Karpin, Svechinski, Mendlevich, Rusakov, Shur, Shirans, Rodetskaya, Minsky, Shifre, Willis, Dolzman, Fedorov, Slipov, Ginsburg, Shramobilsky, Daniel, Rusakov, Kurilius, Stepan, Yarsky, Lemon, Wojciech, Alexandrovich.
These ancient prison walls have watched them all pass by, and many of them were much stronger men than I. But they lived without hope, alone inside this cell. But I've a vision of my home in Israel. My friends, we know what silence brings. Another Hitler waiting in the wings. So stand up now and shout it to the sky. They may bring us to our knees, but we'll never die. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited for too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited for too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited for too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited for too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited for too long. We are leaving Mother Russia.
I want to thank you all for being here today. We'll have one more class on shvuyim, and then we'll go back to the other themes that we've been covering. That's the takeaway for tonight again, that it's important to remember, in addition to what I said at the beginning of class, as Douglas Murray said, we saw this on Sunday in one of our clips, history shows that there is only one people and one place you go for Jews to save other Jews. It won't be the Europeans, it won't be the United Nations. It's going to only be the Jews. And that's ingrained in our souls and in our halakha, our Jewish law. that if we don't free our hostages, or if we don't do everything we can, no one else will do it. If we do everything we can, we will find temporary allies, depending on the politics of the moment. But when it comes to doing the big stuff, only Jews can do it. And now that we have a Jewish country, we have a vehicle through which it can be done. And so when you read or hear about anything going on in Gaza, understand it through the prism of what we've been learning through the many, many weeks and these past 2 weeks, that's what we are. We don't take hostages, but we, as a people, to be a Jew, we free hostages. If it means going to Entebbe and the other side of the world, we free hostages because no one else will do it. America, which is a great country, America will sit and wait and wait. And the only way we're going to free our hostages is by replacing Jimmy Carter with Ronald Reagan. And that one way to get them. So you wait 3-4 years, and then finally you change countries. Or you'll end up trading an important international war criminal in order to free a basketball player who hates America anyway. That's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is, if someone takes our hostages, there is absolutely no limit on what we are allowed to do. And when David did it, there's nothing in the Bible afterwards that says that they all came back to Ziklag, and the next day they felt bad that they had to kill out the entire Amalekite community in order to free their hostages. They came back, they celebrated, no one apologized. No apologies. Thanks so much for being here, and let's see what our two peerless leaders did to each other tonight. Bye-bye. Thank you for coming.